When I first pulled up to that old fishing cabin, I swear my heart just swelled. The place had history. My grandfather built it with his own hands. The salty air hit me, waves rolling soft against the dock, gulls crying above like they were welcoming me home. I'd spent months fixing this cabin, replaced every plank, restored every window, even polished the old dock where I used to fish as a kid. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My little piece of peace away from city noise and HOA nonsense. I parked my truck right by the porch, stepped out, and just stood there for a second, soaking it all in. The boards creaked the same way they did when I was a kid running barefoot across them. I thought about my grandfather, how he'd tell me, "Boy, when the ocean's your backyard, no one can tell you where you belong." Guess I was about to find out how wrong he'd be. Out of nowhere, I hear this sharp voice cut through the sound of the waves. I turn around, and there she is, this blonde woman in a bright pink suit strutting down the sand like she owned the place, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon. She looked straight out of a real estate ad, angry, polished, and way too confident for someone standing on my land. She shouts, "You can't park here. This is HOA property." At first, I actually laughed. I thought maybe she was lost or joking. So I said, calm as could be, "Ma'am, this here's my cabin. Been in my family for 3 generations. She crossed her arms and smirked. "Not according to our records. This area falls under Seaside Community Management now. You can't just pull in here like you own the beach." That last line, it hit different. Because, well, I did own the beach. The whole damn stretch of it. From the dunes to the dock, the sand she was standing on. All mine. Bought it fair and legal when I inherited the land. But I didn't say that right away. I just watched her dig her own hole, clipboard shaking as she kept barking HOA rules like she was auditioning for beach police. I leaned against my truck, smiled a little, and said, "You sure you want to tell the owner he can't park on his own property?" She froze. Just for a second. You could see the confusion flicker across her face. Then she doubled down. "Don't get smart with me. I'll have this vehicle reported and towed." That's when I realized this was going to be one of those days I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "Do what you gotta do. I'll be right here," because something told me this was only the start of the storm. She had no clue she just picked a fight with the man who owned the entire shoreline she thought she controlled. And trust me, when she found out, the waves weren't the only thing crashing down. That little cabin wasn't just wood and nails. It was my family's story written into every crack and board. My granddad built it back in the 50s, long before there was ever talk of homeowners associations or community guidelines. Back then, this whole stretch of coast was wild. Open land, wind-blown dunes, and ocean as far as you could see. The only rules were the tides. He told me once, "Son, this beach don't belong to no one but the sea. You just borrow it for a while." He was humble like that, but he still made sure to get the land papers straight. Paid in full, registered, surveyed. Every inch from the old oak tree by the road down to the dock was marked in his name. 70 years later, that deed still had our family name on it. Mine now. I spent every summer here as a kid. My granddad would wake me up before sunrise, hand me a fishing pole, and say, "Let's go earn breakfast." We'd head down to the dock, the woods slick with morning dew, and fish while the sky turned pink. Sometimes we'd catch something, sometimes not. Didn't matter. The old man said patience was worth more than any fish. He built that cabin himself, with his own hands. Didn't hire a crew, didn't ask for help. Said he wanted to feel every nail that held his dream together. I used to watch him with a hammer tucked behind his ear, whistling some tune from the radio. Every plank of that porch, every shingle on that roof, it all meant something. After he passed, the place sat quiet for a while. Life pulled me into the city. Work, bills, routine, the usual grind that makes you forget who you are. But when I finally came back, I promised myself I'd restore the place just like he left it. And I did. Every window polished, every board sanded. I even fixed the old wine vane he made from an oar in a beer can. It still spun like magic. But standing there now, with that HOA lady yelling at me about community parking rules, I couldn't help but laugh at how crazy it all was. This beach existed before her community even had a name. Before there was a road, a mailbox, or a single house behind that hill. My granddad's land was the first piece of this coast anyone built on. What blew my mind was how these HOA people had convinced themselves that history didn't matter. They came in, built their fancy gated homes, put up private property signs, and just assumed the beach came with it. Never mind that my family had owned it long before their developers ever poured a foundation. I walked down to the dock that day just to cool off and think. The wood creaked under my boots, same sound I remembered as a kid. I ran my hand along the railing, feeling the grooves from when Grandpa carved our initials, JM and LM, mine and his. He said it was our mark on the world. Looking out at the waves, I tried to figure out how the hell an HOA even thought they could claim my land. Maybe they saw an empty cabin and figured no one cared. Maybe the maps they used were old or wrong. Or maybe, and this is what I was starting to believe, they just didn't think anyone would fight back. See the folks in those shiny houses behind me? They weren't beach people. They were rulebook people. The kind who thought paperwork gave them power over everything. But the ocean doesn't care about paperwork, and neither did I. Still, I wasn't about to storm into some HOA meeting and start yelling. My granddad always taught me to handle things smart, not loud. So I went inside the cabin, dug through my old metal lockbox, and pulled out that faded manila folder, the original property deed. The paper was yellowed and soft, but it was the most valuable thing I owned. Clear as day, it said my grandfather's name, the legal description, and the boundary lines, which, according to the survey, ran all the way past where that pink-suited lady had been standing. I traced the lines with my finger, whispering, "Still ours, Grandpa." I took a picture of the document on my phone just in case I needed proof later, because I could already feel where this was heading. That woman wasn't going to just drop it. People like her never do. She had that look, the kind that said she wasn't used to being told no. I stepped outside, the sun hitting the water just right, and for a moment, I forgot all about her. The waves were rolling steady, the air smelled like salt and pine, and it felt like everything was right in the world. But then, over the wind, I heard the sound of a car engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. When I turned around, I saw that same pink-suited woman again, this time with two other people in tow, clipboards, sunglasses, HOA badges hanging around their necks like they were federal agents. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a takeover. They weren't here to talk. They were here to claim. But they were about to learn something my granddad taught me a long time ago. You can't just waltz onto another man's land and rewrite history. Because this beach, it wasn't theirs to manage. It was my grandpa's legacy, and I wasn't about to let some HOA rewrite it. And if they thought I was going to roll over easy, they were about to find out what happens when you push a man on his own sand. The next morning, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, ready to soak in the peace I'd missed for years. The sound of gulls, waves slapping against the dock, and that soft breeze that always smelled like freedom. But peace didn't last long. Down the sandy path came the same woman from yesterday, pink suit, clipboard, sunglasses, and an expression that screamed authority. You'd think she owned the ocean itself the way she strutted down that road. She stopped right at the edge of my driveway, pointed her clipboard like it was a sheriff's badge, and said, "Sir, non-residents aren't allowed past the private gate. This area is for HOA members only." I took a slow sip of coffee, mostly to hide my smile. "Non-resident?" I said. "Ma'am, I live here. This is my property. Been in my family for 70 years. She let out this little snort, the kind that says, "Oh, you poor, confused man." "That's cute," she said. "Everyone says that until we check the HOA records." "Records?" I asked. "You might want to check the county records instead." She crossed her arms, tilting her head like she was about to teach me a lesson. "Sir, this beach and all properties adjacent to it fall under the jurisdiction of the Seaside Homeowners Association. If you don't have your name in our member registry, you're trespassing." I just stared at her for a second, amazed at how confidently wrong she was. Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded, worn piece of paper. The deed. The same one my grandfather signed all those years ago. "See this?" I said, unfolding it carefully. "This document's older than your entire subdivision. County seal, signature, boundary lines. It says right here, everything from the oak tree to the shoreline belongs to my family. That includes this cabin, that dock, and this stretch of sand you're standing on. She leaned forward like she was inspecting it, but didn't even read a word. She just rolled her eyes and said, "That's not how things work here. That line, that's not how things work here." Man, I could have laughed. It was like she thought HOA bylaws were the Constitution or something. I asked her, "You ever hear of property law? Or do you just make up rules as you go?" She tightened her jaw, flipping through her clipboard. "Sir, the HOA maintains authority over the beach access, parking, and maintenance of this area. If you're not part of our community, you can't park, build, or occupy this space." "Occupy?" I said, chuckling. "Lady, I own this space. My granddad built this cabin before your HOA even existed." That clearly ticked her off. Her nostrils flared, and she said, "Then maybe you should have paid your dues, because according to our system, you're in violation of multiple codes." "Codes?" I asked. "What codes?" She glanced down her clipboard. "Let's see. Unauthorized parking, unapproved structure color, and potential environmental damage from your dock extension." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. "Unapproved structure color? You mean the cabin that's been blue since Eisenhower was president?" She ignored the sarcasm completely. "You'll receive a written notice by mail. Once you've paid your fines and registered as a member, we can discuss your property's standing." I stared at her for a moment, realizing she was dead serious. She wasn't just some neighbor being nosy. She actually believed she had power over land she didn't own, governed by rules she didn't write. "Let me make something clear," I said calmly. "You can send whatever notice you want, but this isn't HOA property. Never was, never will be. You're standing on my land." Her lips twisted into a smirk. "We'll see about that." And with that, she scribbled something on her clipboard, turned on her heel, and marched back toward the gate like she'd just served justice. I watched her go, shaking my head. People like that, they don't listen to reason. They live for control. Give them a little bit of authority and suddenly they think they run the coastline. I finished my coffee and looked down the beach. My dock shimmered in the sunlight. My cabin looked brand new, and I felt that familiar spark in my chest. The same one my granddad used to call the fight in your blood. I wasn't about to let some HOA bully rewrite 70 years of history because her clipboard said so. That night, I made copies of every document I had: deed, property map, tax receipts, all of it. I knew she'd be back, and next time she wouldn't come alone. HOAs never do. They love backup, rules, board members, and sometimes even police who don't know the full story. But I had something she didn't: the truth and the paperwork to prove it. Still, part of me knew this was just the beginning. She wasn't done. People like her never stop at one confrontation. They double down, and sure enough, the next. Morning, I saw her pink suit again, this time standing by my fence with a couple of HOA inspectors and a camera. That's when I realized this wasn't just about my cabin anymore. This was about principle, and she was about to learn what happens when you try to evict a man from his own beach. I was sitting on the porch sipping the same cup of coffee when I heard it. Sirens. Not loud city sirens, but close enough that you know someone called the cops on you. I looked down the sandy road, and sure enough, 2 police cars were bumping along the path toward the cabin. I didn't even need to guess who called them. Karen, pink suit, blonde hair, clipboard, was standing right by the mailbox with her arms crossed, grinning like she just saved the neighborhood. The cops got out, one older guy and one young female officer, both looking a little confused to even be here. The older one asked, "Sir, are you the one refusing to leave the HOA property?" I actually laughed. "Refusing to leave? This is my grandfather's cabin. I own this land." Karen jumped in before I could say more. "That's not true." "This is common HOA beachfront. He just showed up and started parking like he owns the place." She was practically shaking with confidence, or caffeine. I calmly reached inside, grabbed a thick envelope, and handed it to the officer. "That," I said, "is the original deed to this property. It's been in my family since 1954, long before your little HOA even existed. The older cop flipped through the papers while Karen kept yapping. He's lying. Those papers are probably fake. This whole stretch is maintained by us. He's trespassing! The younger officer leaned in and said, "Ma'am, this deed's legit. It's recorded with the county registrar. The property line extends to the high tide mark." She looked over at me. "That means all this, the sand, the dock, even that fence line. It's yours." You could see the color drain from Karen's face like someone unplugged her. The confident smirk melted right off, replaced by that wide-eyed look people get when they realize they've made a very public mistake. The male officer turned to her and said, "Ma'am, technically you're the one trespassing here." For a moment, the only sound was the wind and the seagulls. Then she tried to recover. "Well, I'll have to verify this with the HOA board. We have our own regulations, you know." "Sure," I said, leaning back against the porch post. "You go ahead and check with them. Maybe they'll remind you this beach doesn't belong to your clipboard." The cops chuckled under their breath. One of them gave me a small nod before walking back to the cruiser. Karen stood there for another few seconds, like she was trying to think of one more thing to say, but she didn't have anything left. She turned on her heels and stomped back toward the fancy houses, heels sinking into the sand with every furious step. As the police cars rolled away, I couldn't help but grin. My granddad always said, "Paper wins every argument." Guess he was right. I went back to my porch, poured myself another cup of coffee, and just watched the waves roll in. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. Not after she got embarrassed in front of the police. She'd be back, and probably with backup, and I was right. Because the next morning, she didn't come alone. She showed up with 3 board members, a drone, and a printed notice of violation. That's when I realized this HOA wasn't done yet. But neither was I. After that little cop incident, I figured maybe, just maybe, the HOA would back off. But a few days passed and something kept nagging at me. The way Karen talked about community property made me wonder if they'd actually crossed more than just verbal lines. So I called a local land surveyor. Old guy named Chuck who'd been mapping this area since before most of those HOA homes even existed. When he showed up, he recognized the place immediately. "Haven't seen this cabin in years," he said, tapping his hat. "Used to belong to your granddad, right?" "Good man." We walked the property together, him checking his instruments and staking small orange flags in the sand. He kept frowning, measuring again, shaking his head. After about an hour, he turned to me and said, "You're not gonna like this." He pointed toward the cluster of shiny new cabanas and picnic decks the HOA loved to show off in their community events. "See that line?" he said, tapping the map. "That's your boundary, and those cabanas? They're sitting squarely on your land. So's half their dock." I just stood there for a second, staring at the flags. I wasn't even mad yet, just stunned. They hadn't just tried to boss me around. They'd literally built on my property, my grandfather's land. I called my lawyer, sent over the survey maps, and within hours he confirmed it. Full-blown encroachment. He even sounded impressed. "They didn't just cross the line," he said. "They built a whole picnic party on your sand." That night I sat on the porch watching their evening event. Music, string lights, laughter, all happening on my property. The same people who'd called the cops on me were drinking wine and roasting marshmallows 10 feet over my boundary line. The nerve. The next morning, right on schedule, here came Karen, pink suit, clipboard, fake smile. "Good morning," she called out, her tone suddenly all sugar. "We might have gotten off on the wrong foot. The HOA board wants to make peace. If you join our association, we'll waive all your membership fees and even include you in our private beach events." I almost choked on my coffee laughing. "You built your beach events on my land, and now you're inviting me to join your club like it's a favor?" She blinked, pretending not to understand. "Well, yes, technically some of the structures overlap with your parcel, but it's all in the spirit of community." I leaned in, dropped my voice a little. "You mean you trespassed, built on my property without a permit, and now you want me to play along?" She stiffened. "There's no need to be hostile. I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully." "Yeah," I said, "peacefully, in court." Her face twitched. You wouldn't do that. The board has resources, lawyers. Good, I cut in. So do I. I turned around, walked inside, and started drafting an official complaint. By noon, my lawyer had filed notices with both the county and the HOA's legal department. Every inch of that cabana, picnic deck, and dock section built past my boundary line was now part of a legal dispute. And the best part? Once that notice went through, the HOA couldn't hold a single community event until it was resolved. County restriction. No parties, no beach gatherings, nothing. That evening, I watched Karen pacing by the cabanas, phone pressed to her ear, waving her arms around. A few neighbors walked over asking what was going on, and she was forced to admit they'd built everything on private land. Mine. The looks on their faces were priceless. All that HOA pride? Gone with the tide. But I wasn't done yet. If they thought a legal complaint was bad, wait until they saw what I did next. Because I decided to remind them exactly who owned this beach. The county hearing was set for a Thursday morning, and man, I'll tell you, I was ready. I had my folder, my survey reports, old photos of my granddad fishing off the same dock they'd hijacked, and the original deed tucked neatly inside a plastic sleeve. Karen, though? She rolled in like she was walking a red carpet instead of facing a property violation hearing. Pink suit freshly pressed, clipboard in hand, heels clicking like a metronome of arrogance. She strutted into that hearing room like she owned the place. Behind her came two of her HOA board buddies, both looking nervous but pretending to act tough. I swear they were whispering like middle schoolers before a spelling bee. Meanwhile, I just sat there calm, sipping bad courthouse coffee, waiting for the show to start. When the county commissioner called our case, Karen jumped right up, all confidence and attitude. Your Honor, she started, this individual has been illegally occupying and obstructing community beachfront property that has been under HOA management for over 15 years. The commissioner raised an eyebrow. Under whose management, exactly? Karen straightened her clipboard like it was a badge of power. The Coastal Dunes Homeowners Association, sir. We maintain this beach, its facilities, and community events. It's part of our charter. I could practically feel my lawyer smirking next to me. The commissioner flipped through the paperwork, then leaned back and said, Ma'am, before we go any further, do you have any documents that show your association owns or leases this property? Karen's smile froze. Well, not owns exactly, but it's been considered community property for... The commissioner cut her off, holding up a faded map. According to county records, this parcel, including the beach, dock, and all adjacent land, was deeded to the Whitaker family in 1954. That's... you, sir? He looked at me. Yes, sir, I said, nodding. My grandfather built the cabin himself. It's been in my family ever since. The commissioner nodded, flipping through more documents. And your deed has no mention of HOA transfer, no easement, and no lien. Everything here checks out. Karen tried to recover, waving her clipboard like a white flag. But, Your Honor, public use gives us jurisdiction. Our residents have used that beach for years. It's community tradition. That's when the commissioner leaned forward, dead serious. Public use doesn't override private ownership, ma'am. You can't just decide someone else's land belongs to you because you've been having cookouts on it. You could have heard a pin drop. Then he pulled up the county maps, big, dusty black and white prints from the 1950s showing every original boundary. He tapped his pen on the thick red line marking my property. Do any of your HOA documents predate these deeds? He asked. Karen froze. Her two board members looked at the floor. Not a peep. The commissioner set his pen down and sighed. Then, it appears your association has no authority over this land. Furthermore, your organization is hereby ordered to remove all structures and improvements that extend into private property. Immediately. Karen's jaw literally dropped. Remove? But those cabanas were built illegally, the commissioner interrupted. Consider this your official notice. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just smiled. That slow, satisfied grin you get when justice finally catches up with nonsense. Karen stormed out, muttering about appeals and lawyer letters, but her board members lagged behind, shaking their heads. One even stopped and quietly said, "Man, we didn't even know. Sorry about that." As they walked off, my lawyer patted my shoulder and said, "Well, that went better than expected." I laughed. "You kidding? That went exactly how I hoped." Later that day, as I drove back toward the cabin, I passed the same HOA beach area. Workers were already taking down the members-only signs and unhooking lights from the cabanas. The dock ropes had been cut, and half the beach was taped off with county notices stuck to the posts. Karen stood there in her pink suit, arms crossed, watching everything fall apart. For once, she didn't have her clipboard, just that look of defeat, the kind you can't hide when you realize you picked a fight with the wrong guy. I parked in front of my cabin, stepped out, and looked over the ocean. The breeze felt a little lighter that day. Maybe it was justice, or maybe just the smell of freedom finally blowing back where it belonged. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen didn't seem like the kind of person who'd just give up, not without one last swing. And buddy, I was right, because what she tried next wasn't just desperate, it was straight up ridiculous. You won't believe what she did after that hearing. About a month later, I woke up to the sound of heavy engines rumbling down the beach road. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and nearly laughed out loud. 3 big county bulldozers lined up, orange vests everywhere, and a few HOA board members standing off to the side looking like they'd just been hit with a tsunami of reality. The crew foreman waved at me. "Morning! Got orders from the county to clear everything past the easement line. That's all your property, right?" "Sure is," I said, trying not to sound too proud. The first scoop of that bulldozer hit one of their precious cabanas, and man, it felt good. Watching those exclusive HOA structures come down plank by plank was better than any apology they could have offered. Karen wasn't there that morning, which was probably smart. I doubt she could have handled watching her empire crumble one sunshade at a time. By noon, the cabanas were flattened, the picnic deck was in splinters, and their fancy dock, the one they built halfway into my shoreline, was being dragged out of the water. You could see the shock on the HOA board members' faces. For years, they'd acted untouchable, but now they were just bystanders watching county workers erase their authority. And then came the best part, the private HOA access signs. Those things had been scattered all along my fence line like they owned the view. The crew yanked every single one of them out and tossed them into a pile. When the wind blew, one sign flipped over, and I could still see the words, "Property of HOA," scratched in faded paint. I grinned and thought, not anymore. That afternoon, I noticed some of my neighbors slowly walking over, folks I hadn't seen much since the whole thing started. They weren't angry. They were relieved. One older guy from down the road shook my hand and said, "We didn't think anyone could stand up to them. Guess we were wrong." Another lady told me how she'd been fined 3 times for parking in her own driveway during her son's visits. "Karen made everyone miserable," she said. "You did us all a favor." That's when it hit me. I hadn't just fought for my beach. I'd fought for everyone who'd been bullied by that HOA. All those people who got letters, threats, or fines for things that didn't even make sense. Now they saw that it was possible to push back. A couple of days later, word spread that the HOA board held an emergency meeting. According to one of the members, they'd voted to remove Karen as president. The official statement said she was resigning for health reasons. But let's be real, that health issue was just called embarrassment. When you get publicly corrected by the county and lose half your structures, your clipboard loses its magic real quick. I didn't celebrate or rub it in. I just did one simple thing. I built a small wooden sign and planted it at the end of my driveway. It wasn't fancy, just white paint on a board that said private property. Access by permission only, that was it. No threats, no HOA jargon, no fake authority. Just a reminder that some land still belongs to the people who earned it, not the people who think they can manage it. The next week, something unexpected started happening. Neighbors I barely knew began waving as I drove by. A few even dropped off coffee or homemade pie to say thanks. One guy told me, "You didn't just get your land back, you gave the rest of us our backbone. And you know what? That meant more than the court win. Because it wasn't just about property lines anymore. It was about standing up to the kind of people who think control equals respect." Now, when I walk the beach, it feels different. It's quieter, calmer, but not in that awkward HOA rulebook way. It's free again. You can hear the laughter of families, dogs running through the surf, fishermen casting lines at sunset. No one asking for permits or guest passes. I'd look up at the horizon sometimes and think about my granddad. How proud he'd be knowing the beach he built a life on was still in the family, still untamed, still ours. And every time I pass that simple wooden sign at my driveway, it makes me smile. Because it's not just a warning and it's a symbol. A reminder that rules only mean something when they're fair. And that sometimes you've got to fight the system just to remind folks what freedom looks like. I didn't just reclaim my land, I reset the balance. And as the sun set over that open stretch of sand, one thing was crystal clear. The tide had turned, and this time, it wasn't going back. Now, every morning, I sit out on that same creaky porch with a mug of coffee and the sound of the tide rolling in. The salty air still smells like my childhood, a mix of seaweed, wood, and freedom. The waves hit the rocks just the way they did when Grandpa used to cast his line off the dock. Only difference now? There's no yelling, no violation notices, and definitely no pink-suited HOA patrol stomping through my sand like they own the place. It's peaceful again, the way it was always supposed to be. The county gave them 30 days to tear down everything that touched my land. And they did. Those shiny beach cabanas? Gone. The picnic deck where they held their HOA parties? Torn up and hauled away. Even their dock extension, the one they bragged about on their website, had to be dismantled plank by plank. Every piece that got removed felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. The HOA tried to act like it was a mutual agreement, but everyone in town knew the truth. Karen's name became a running joke at the bait shop. "Hey, you heard about the lady who tried to own the ocean?" One guy laughed. I didn't bother correcting them. Let the story spread. Karen herself? She sold her beach house about 2 weeks after the hearing. No big for sale sign, no goodbyes, just packed up and vanished. Some folks said she moved inland, somewhere with no beach and no HOAs. Can't say I blame her. It's tough living next door to the guy who proved you wrong in front of the whole county. As for the HOA, they don't even come near my stretch anymore. Their little golf carts stop right at the property line like there's an invisible force field. No warning letters, no surprise inspections, nothing. They know better now. Once the county backed me up, they got real quiet, real fast. Funny how brave people get until the law steps in. Now it's just me, the seagulls, and the sound of waves slapping the dock. Sometimes I see kids from the neighborhood walking the shoreline again. No members-only signs to stop them. No HOA goon ready to scold them for unauthorized play. That's how my granddad wanted it. Open. Simple. Free. Every once in a while, I'll get visitors who say, "Man, you really showed them, but truth is I didn't do it to win. I did it because this land meant something." My granddad built this place with his bare hands. No boards, no committees, no fake authority. Just family sweat and pride. That kind of legacy deserves to be protected, not fenced off. Now, when I pull up in my old truck and park right by the sand, it's not to make a statement. It's just home. But yeah, I'll admit there's a little satisfaction in knowing that parking spot once triggered an entire HOA meltdown. Every time my tires crunch against that sand, it's like the beach itself is saying, "Welcome back, kid. You did good." The best part? The silence. No phone calls, no warnings, no letters slipped under the door. Just peace. The kind of peace that only comes after a fight you didn't start but damn sure finished right. Funny thing about tides, I said to my buddy the other day, they always wash away what doesn't belong. And he laughed and said, "Guess that includes bad HOAs, huh?" I just grinned, took another sip of coffee, and watched the sunrise spread across my beach. My land. The waves glittered like gold, rolling in and out like the world had finally settled. It's crazy how much noise people make trying to control what they don't understand. But in the end, the tide always wins. It's steady, patient, unstoppable, kind of like justice when it's on your side. So yeah, every morning now, I sit there watching the water do its thing, knowing the beach is finally back in the right hands. No pink suits, no clipboards, just peace, coffee, and the sound of home. Subscribe, I'd tell folks with a smirk. If you think HOAs need a crash course in private property, preferably taught by the ocean,